As we come closer and closer to November 1st elections, of course, political parties are continuing to campaign all across the country for those local government elections. Many promises are being made in an effort to woo voters. Some of the promises are feasible, others seem not. So we're asking the question, should political parties face legal action for making false promises? To help me unpack this and more, I'm joined by Brand Reputation Manager Solly Moeng and Head of Programs at the the Electoral Institute for Sustainable Democracy in Africa, Grant Masterson. You are part of this conversation tonight. Send us your WhatsApp questions and comments, 072-110-5584, or you can tweet us at Newzroom 405. If democracy is a social contract between the elected and ordinary citizens, should manifestos be made legally binding contracts? Gentlemen, good evening. Thank you very much for your time. Grant, let me start with you. Why is it in a democracy like ours we have allowed politicians to make promises they will not honor?
Because the voters continue to vote for those politicians, Tabo. So as long as politicians can get away with saying one thing during elections and doing another thing in between elections, and as long as voters continue to support that behavior, politicians are going to do it. And that is the basis of any democracy. If we don't approve of what our politicians have done, if we don't approve of the policies or the economic stimulus packages, etc., that they've introduced, then we should be willing to vote them out. But because we have across the spectrum enormously loyal voters to particular brands, then you tend to see this kind of behavior become very common.
Yeah, and why has the debate around non-compliance attracting some kind of sanction in law not being entertained?
Because I think it's practically infeasible to create a legally binding contract based on verbal cues is legally problematic, number one, and also number two, it also infantilizes the voter. We have to rely on the voter to make the final decision who they believe and who they don't believe. And I think that we do need to give our voters credit that we have heard some very outlandish statements, outlandish claims in elections from parties. And by and large, people know that these claims are never going to materialize. It's something that happens across the spectrum of political parties. They all make promises that sound too good to be true, and most of the time they are. And our voters are becoming more and more cynical. I think one of the products that we see as a result of that cynicism with politicians saying one thing and doing another can be seen in the increasing rates of abstention. People who are not registering to vote or who are staying away from the polls. That cynicism is a product of a disconnect between what politicians tell us and what they do.
Solly, it seems the name of the game as far as branding political parties or politicians is if I can say something a little bit more outrageous or say better than my opponent, then it means potentially I could be elected in.
Yeah, well, it seems to me, it seems to me that voters first of all, don't read or they don't understand, but also the politicians who make these promises know that they will get away with it, or maybe some of them don't even know that the promises they make are not realistic. For instance, some people, we're heading towards local government elections. I've seen politicians make promises that can only be delivered by national government. At municipal level, for instance, you can decide on any immigration policies for South Africa, but they go along saying, yeah, we're going to stop people from coming here if they don't belong to South Africa. These are local government elections, for God's sake. Now, the people who are supposed to vote for them, voters, are supposed to say to them, no, wait a minute, you can't say that. Make the promises you're supposed to make it to us about have to do with the cleaning up of and the delivery of services at local government, but they're not. So there seems to be a level of ignorance on both sides. And so what brand, what image they attach to those political parties is based on emotion a lot of times.
Yeah. Does the promiser suffer any collateral damage as far as brand equity is concerned?
Well, the thing, I don't know what brand value people place on these politicians, and that is a problem. But yes, if promises get made and they're not delivered upon, people will get angry. We're going to see more, protests that we've seen over the years in South Africa when promises have been made that do not get delivered upon. But then Politicians know that these people keep coming back to them over and over again. The ANC has failed over and over again, but people keep voting for the ANC, apparently. I mean, that is assuming that we believe what comes out of the IEC, right? So we should ask ourselves, why do people keep doing this?
Mentioning the IEC, Grant, can the IEC direct parties, for example, to make these manifestos available for a pre-audit of some sort before the launches, so that the IEC can look in them and say, look, this is an impractical promise. For example, you don't have resources to be able to come into power and say, all right, we'll scrap all the debt. Everybody who's been owing us for 27 years, forget that. You don't have to pay that anymore.
No, the IEC wouldn't do what you've suggested now in this interview, but the IEC does engage with the political parties on an electoral code of conduct. So there are rules and there are stipulations that the parties agree to when they commit to that electoral code of conduct. But that electoral code of conduct doesn't include a prohibition on making outlandish claims. The IEC wouldn't place itself as the jury deciding which claims are feasible and which claims are not. And that I think is right, because the moment that the IEC becomes involved in deciding that this or that or the other party is making outlandish claims, then they're really entering into the political terrain. The responsibility comes back to the voter. Now, I think I would suggest that when you ask Solly, do politicians suffer from reputational harm if they make these promises and don't deliver? Perhaps at the national level it's less clear, but at the local government level, where people, certainly ward councillors, are known in their communities, and there is a very, very close link between the councillor and the conditions in their communities, there is quite clearly greater brand damage. And I think this is why we see in a number of parties there is a rejection of the status quo councillors who we know before, who the community believes have failed them. So certainly at the local government level, I think because of the proximity to the voter and the familiarity in the local communities of the voter, then there is a greater risk for local councillors, which is why we see a greater turnover in the local government than we do necessarily at the national level.
Yeah, but you know, some may argue and say even that non-compliance in other instances is not really punished, because maybe some of them are even allowed to retire with the privilege of their pension still intact, right? And there's been absolutely non-compliance. You've delivered nothing. Your pension is still pretty much together, and you can rest into perpetuity, so to speak.
Well, yeah, that's right. I mean, I think if voters want to see some sort of punishment meted out for politicians making outlandish claims, maybe misleading voters even, the way in which all politicians feel the effects of a voter's displeasure the best is if that voter shows up on election day and votes for another candidate. And so that is really the best way, the most effective way for someone to express their displeasure for a politician's actions. And it remains the cornerstone of the electoral process, is the voter's right to choose.
Yeah. Can I just come in there?
Yeah, yes, sorry.
Yeah, look, I think also the fact that we vote up to now, we vote for political parties, but not for individuals. Individuals tend to get away with stuff that, as Grant has just said. So the party would come in and say, well, we'll put him aside, but we still support the party. This is not about the party. What this guy has done doesn't represent the party. We are the party. We're going to shaft him. They redeploy the person somewhere else. So in the end, people don't really pay for the failure to deliver to citizens. Political party brands have been strong up to now. People will vote for the ANC or for the EFF, irrespective of what the individual EFF representative does or fails to do at local level.
Yeah. Let's take a break. When we come back, so I want to ask, while you're on that, whether or not the fact that they're now independent candidates, does that put a different dynamic then into it? And would those independent candidates be directly held accountable and therefore cannot hide behind the banner of the political party? Let's hear your views tonight. 072-110-5584. Should manifestos be made legally binding contracts between the elected and the ordinary citizens? We'll hear your views in a moment. Welcome back. Tonight, in conversation with the Brand Reputation Manager Solly Moeng, as well as the head of programs at the Electoral Institute for Sustainable Democracy in Africa Grant Masterson. And taking your thoughts as well tonight on Twitter, Newzroom 405, or on 072-110-5584. Got a question coming through on Twitter. Before I go to it, Solly, let's go back to what you mentioned. The individuals being able to hide behind the banner of the party, or the party saying, no, look, we've dealt with that individual. It's not the organization, it's the individual who is probably now facing charges in court, or there's been an SIU report, and maybe they've shifted them and made them an ambassador somewhere far away. I mean, with independent candidates now, will they be able to be cushioned in such a way?
Well, I hope not. I really hope not. I think that a lot of South Africans have been asking for the electoral system to change for individual candidates who are known and chosen by the communities in which that they're supposed to serve. Should be able to, for them to be able to stand for elections. So this is the case now. I think that at the end it relies on the voters, on the communities to say, we know who the councillor is in this area. This is what is happening that is not supposed to happen. This is what's not happening that's supposed to happen. How do we hold that person to account? Do people make the effort to know the councillor and make sure that they make them deliver on the promises they made? If they don't, then they should kick them out. I think it's going to be harder for individual candidates who manage to get elected to make promises that they do not fulfill, because they will definitely be kicked out the next time. There are no big party banners to hide behind.
Looking at corporate brands and how they make promises, do consumers keep that in mind, or do we forget everything that, for example, a corporate brand would say about its brand promise that led us in the first place to choose that brand? And does it work differently when it comes to politicians?
I think that in the end, it depends on the activism of the consumers of the brand, as it were. It depends on the level to which they get informed. They are informed, they compare, and they ask the right questions. I think there are corporate brands in South Africa whose customers ask them really difficult questions. They look at what is on the packaging. They want to compare what's on the packaging with what's inside the container. And if there's no consistency between the two, they will really bring it out. But the things generally with voters in South Africa is that we don't ask the questions. We live in eras of short attention spans. We don't read long documents. We don't know, for instance, that Malema says Africa belongs to all Africans, therefore we must open our borders. Anyone who wants to come to South Africa must come in. On the one hand, he's saying that, but on the other hand, there's a lot of frustration with the arrival of many illegal immigrants into the country who are taking up jobs and other opportunities that should be going to South Africans. These own people are not saying to Malema, but wait a minute, you can't say those things because that's not what we want. He gets away with it because they're not asking him questions, they're not comparing, they don't seem to be reading what the EFF is saying and what Malema keeps saying all over the place. So it's voters in South Africa must take responsibility.
Grant, a question from, well, I suppose it's a comment from Kagiso on Twitter saying, well, I was asking the question, should manifestos be made a legal binding document? He says, only if they're able to quantify and are tested against the populations they are proposing to want to assist. How easy or how complex would that process be?
Massively complex, and this is the issue. Even in local government elections, Solly is spot on when he says we tend to default to national political issues to sell local government councillor seats, which of course in itself is hugely disingenuous. But you know, when you try and get down to what promises can the politician make, there are just too many variables. Let's just take the example of the economy. All parties have some kind of promises for the voter about jobs, about houses, about an improved economic status. Famously, the administration of Jacob Zuma, when he came in, promised 5 million job opportunities in his first term. And of course, at the end of 5 years, the economy had shrunk. But of course, he pointed to the global financial crisis that had impacted the government's ability to grow the economy. So he had a get-out-of-jail-free card, if you will, for why he hadn't provided 5 million job opportunities like he promised in the election. So the moment that you start trying to make manifestos legally binding, and you have to start to measure to what extent did the politician fail to deliver, to what extent were there circumstances beyond their control, it becomes an impossibility to make these documents legally binding.
Yeah. The fact that, for example, when these promises are made, for example, there is no mention of how this will affect ordinary citizens by way of tax. I mean, that in itself almost brings it closer to home. Are you able, is there a remedy for the citizen to object to that, and what remedies can they exercise?
I think that's such an important point you make. The basis upon which democracies were founded was that we, the people, agree to be taxed. We agree to the government reaching into our pockets and taking our money in the form of taxes to pay for government services and other things that the government provides. And the trade-off for us agreeing is that we get to vote for who gets to spend that money. And that is the critical heart of a democracy which is accountable. And of course, in South Africa, we have the dynamic where the tax base is a very small tax base and the voter base is a wider tax base. So there is some disconnect between what the tax base wants and what the voting base wants, which does also allow for and create space for politicians to get away with some of these really outrageous claims.
Now, Solly, there's also been a war of what you'd say posters and so on and so forth, and some campaigns that seemingly have fallen flat and having had to be retracted. How much brand damage does that bring with it, or do we just keep going and we forget about all that?
Well, if you referring to the Phoenix incident, I think there are people who were disappointed in the DA. I personally think the DA shouldn't have gotten involved in that kind of battle in the mud, as it were. This DA has this big race shower hanging over its head, and the minute it gets involved in battles like that, it was never going to win, and it wasn't prepared when it went in there. So, political parties have to be really careful. They have to understand first of all, what images they have in the communities. What do people think about them? And what are the things that could easily lead them to give to the enemy, to score own goals, as it were. And I think this is what the DA did in Phoenix. It should have avoided that. Other parties, of course, make promises. It's up to, what South Africa really needs for change to happen. It's for citizens to look at those posters, to look at these messages and ask the right questions and ask these people, what do they really mean by that? Because politicians in South Africa get away with a lot of stuff they shouldn't be getting away with. And they get away with these things, it's because of us, because we allow them to get away with these things. They can't change, it cannot change if we don't say, stop, it's enough. You can't do that.
What I ask myself, and I've been trying to speak to some of the political parties in the various roundtables and debates that we are having, is whether or not have any of these parties, Grant, made an assessment of the resources, the revenue that is available vis-a-vis the promises that they are making. Some of them are new parties who are not in governance, so I would gather they're not even in council. They have no idea of how much money really is there as they're making these promises.
Yeah, that's right. And we also have to remind ourselves here, we're not talking about national elections. We're not even talking about the Treasury, SARS, and all the money that we talk about in February when we look at the national budget. We are talking about local municipalities. And we have to remember that the Auditor General and various news organizations have done a thorough assessment of the state of our local municipalities right now. And the vast majority of those councils are in huge financial distress. And so I would have expected a party that, or even a candidate that seriously wants to win votes in a particular municipality to be explaining to the people of his community or her community, why is it you should vote for me, because I have a plan to get us out of the financial difficulties that we're in. I think a lot of parties they have a wish list, and it's all. It sounds fantastic when you are standing on a podium and you're addressing people, and there's cheering and there's singing and dancing, but very little detail on how that's practically going to work when they actually get into the council. Now, I come back to this point because I completely agree with Solly on this again. The corporate sector, people ask very, very tough questions. As an electorate, we give politicians a big pass most of the time. Nothing keeps the CEO of a big brand up at night more than the thought that people will switch away from his product. And for politicians, it's exactly the same. If we switch away from voting for that party, that is the thing that parties fear more than anything else. And that is the power of the vote and the power that we can use to effect change in these councils.
Yeah. So what then do you suggest, right? What should the electorate do so that they're not taken for a ride? What are some of the practical things that really need to happen? I know Solly immediately said, I'm not sure how many actually go and read that manifesto and scrutinize it and really compare to with the facts to say, okay, this is what your problem is. It's actually a national competence.
So, no, go ahead, Grant.
Yes, Grant, go ahead.
Thank you. So I want to give Solly some time, but let me just respond very quickly. It's exactly as we've been saying all along. Please get serious about the responsibility that you have as a voter. Find out who are the candidates in your ward, in your municipality. Remember, you're voting for your ward, but your vote also counts towards the proportional representation in your municipality as well. So your vote counts twice. And so it's such an important thing that we do. Turn out and vote. Don't stay at home on the public holiday and enjoy your braaivleis or some TV. Turn out to vote and take the vote seriously. That is the responsibility that we have as citizens.
And yes, sorry.
Not only should you do that, you should go. I totally agree with you, Grant, but you should also get to know who your councillor is. A lot of people don't know who their councillors are. They don't know what they can ask of their councillors, what they cannot ask of their councillors. So in the end, it's about the extent to which voters allow themselves to be informed about their rights. People don't know their rights. People still worship people. The minute somebody becomes a councillor, they are seen as kings and queens. And actually, those people are supposed to be the servants of the people, not the other way around.
Let's twist it a little bit. We've been speaking about the electorate quite a bit, but what are some of the mistakes that political parties really are often doing? Now we've got new parties, we've got independent candidates. What would you say as advice to them, things that they are currently doing in terms of branding that work and things that don't work, or at least work against them?
Look, independent candidates are at a disadvantage in that they don't have many times they don't have the national footprint, or they don't have the visibility, the resources to create the kind of visibility that they need in the areas where they want to be voted. So they should focus on, first of all, they should understand what the issues are in the area where they're presenting themselves as candidates. What are the key challenges to the community there, and how are they going to realistically challenge, deal with those challenges, and what if there are weaknesses? For instance, if they know that the municipality is broke, they need to be upfront with the community before the election. It doesn't mean that they must create excuses, of course, for non-performance later, but they must say, look, these are the challenges that we're facing. If we're going to raise funds for these things to happen, people must pay their rates, for instance. The traffic cops must play their part. All the sources of revenue that have been disabled, that have been rendered malfunctioning in the past, have to be brought. There's got to be law and order, because municipalities also rely on rates and taxes being collected locally. When people don't pay their rates and taxes, electricity and other services, then they cannot expect whoever is going to be governed or to be elected in the area to deliver on those promises.
Solly Moeng and Grant Masterson, appreciate your time, guys. Thank you very much for coming through. That is a brand expert there, Solly Moeng, and head of programs at the Institute, the Electoral Institute for Sustainable Democracy in Africa, Grant Masterson.